3, 2, 1.
The History with Jackson podcast. Hello and welcome to the History of Jackson podcast, the podcast where we bring up-to-date historical research to you in an accessible and digestible way. So hello everyone, welcome back to the History of Jackson podcast, and today we are joined by author, historian and good friend Estelle Paranque. How you doing, Estelle?
Hey Jackson, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Now, I'm really excited to talk about Thorns, Lust and Glory, the betrayal of Anne Boleyn today. But I think the first question I want to ask you is, what inspired you to not only, write this book about Anne Boleyn, but look at Anne Boleyn from this angle?
Well, you know what? I think I'm gonna quote one of our friends now. She's not gonna like this, but Nikki Clark, and you were actually sitting next to me, Jackson, and we were at Chalk, and she said, doing that type of history where I look at the French angle is becoming my trademark. And I laughed and I said, you're probably right, Nikki. Like, it is becoming my trademark. And I think it all started with, obviously, when I did my PhD. And my PhD was obviously my first books, because I have academic books as well as trade books, were all about Elizabeth I, but it was always about her relationship with France. And I wrote all these books and I did all this research, and it really showed a new light on Elizabeth. It showed a new light on her politics, on the woman she was, because sometimes she let her guard down with some French ambassadors, and I had a glimpse of the women I knew from her private poems, private prayers. Even the years where she's a princess, you have the glimpse of her vulnerability, I think. It's very interesting. And the more I worked on this, and when I finished this, I was then contacted by BBC to do, the documentary. It's a docudrama thing, I think actually, the Boleyns, a Scandalous Family. And they asked me about Anne Boleyn and the French. And then here I was like, of course, it all started with Anne. Because in many ways, Anne is a massive Francophile. And I wondered why Elizabeth was so cautious throughout her reign not to really have bad relationships with the French. And you can say it's only for political reasons, and that might be true. Like, I think I might be 80% true. But I think in the 20% left, you also have the fact that her mother had good relations with France. That Anne Boleyn actually, a part of her formative years, was raised and educated in France. The fact that she was completely fluent and bilingual, because you have to understand here that her whole world became completely French for 7 years. And obviously, I think it impacted Anne and then impacted Elizabeth, even if they had only 2.5 years or so together. I think it kind of was something so important to her mother that then it became important to her later on. And so I got very inspired by doing this documentary, by researching. I was researching slowly. I was finishing Blood, Fire and Gold when I started. Wait a minute. No, I had finished completely. I think I'd finished writing Blood, Fire and Gold. So I was in the space of editing. And so then I started doing the research for this documentary. And I was like, oh my God, that's so interesting. That's so interesting. And then I told my agent and my editor, I have my next book, And I just thought that looking at Anne through a new angle, trying to discuss things from a new perspective, would give her story a new start kind of thing, like a new way of seeing her and of seeing the politics at the time, and of seeing why, in a way she was so important, but also how she misjudged and miscalculated her importance. I think when you look at my book, it's really, I think what strikes is the fact that she's so close to the French, but not close. She's not a princess, right? She's not French. She doesn't come from a French royal family. So she's at risk, but she doesn't really understand that until it's too late.
I think that's a really interesting point there, Fran, because I think a lot of time with her, we get caught up on the idea that she's this kind of surrogate French princess, which you do talk about. But the interesting aspect that you spoke about there was the the importance of the French to Elizabeth because they're important to Anne. And I think very, very often when we speak about this period, or the late medieval one as well, we look at kings and what was important to their father and how those views transfer. And I think it's very interesting that we don't look at that when we look at, Catherine of Aragon and Mary and Anne and Elizabeth. Why do you think that is?
You just said it, like, Jackson, it's so interesting. Like, I never pointed it out this way, but you're right. When we look at kings, we look at what their fathers were interested in, or what relationship they were developing. And when you look, for example, with obviously Henry VII, he developed, a Spanish alliance, right? Like he did. And Henry is something that he's going to pursue with Catherine of Aragon, is something that it's very important to him. But then obviously, because then it's going to be Charles V and all these politics are going to get in the way, and then he's seeking a relationship with France as well, with François I. But so here I think it's important to realize that when you look at the queens, you're going to pay attention to their father, obviously what they did, and because they try, for Mary I and Elizabeth I, it's so important for them to make strong link between them and Henry VIII. I mean, even more so for Elizabeth I than for Mary, because I think her legitimacy is never questioned. Her parents have been together for 20 years. Like, there was never, everyone recognizes the marriage of her parents. Like, there's no doubt that, even if you believe that Anne Boleyn was queen, there's no doubt that first it was, Catherine of Aragon, and then it was Anne Boleyn, and then, you see what I mean? So even if you recognize the marriage of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, it doesn't mean that you dismiss and do not recognize Mary I's legitimacy and the fact that she's the daughter of Henry VIII. Well, Elizabeth, obviously, she's trying so much harder to fight for that legitimacy, to fight for that link with her father. But of course, they are so much their mother's daughter, right? Like, they are so much, and both of them are so similar to their mother. It makes so much, when people were always like, give a hard time to Mary I on so many levels, but one of them being like marrying Philip II of Spain. But it makes so much sense for her, given her background, given her love and allegiance and devotion to her mother, to make that Spanish alliance again. Also, it is a good political move in many ways. Maybe not after the reign of Edward VI, but if you put it in a really political and diplomatic, lens, then you see that it makes actually lots of sense for Mary to do this. Spain is the strongest country of Europe at the time, and having that alliance for Mary is a way to show that she's close to her mother, but it's also a way to show that she understands the politics and the diplomacy of the time. With Elizabeth, obviously she can't be pro-Spanish. That's not going to happen. That's her half-sister's domain. And so who's left? Of course it's going to be France. But France is complicated. France is always, even with Anne. I mean, with Anne, it is. And that's what I do with my book, I think, is that I take you from understanding why she has their support. She has François' support. But then there are some ambassadors that are not sure what they're doing. There's also this question of, like, who does she think she is? There's also this question of, like, okay, it does help us. Like, I'm talking, like, from the French perspective, what's happening. Bloody hell, is she going to really become Queen of England? What's happening? You see, I mean, she's like no one else in many ways, or you could compare her, I think, to some extent to Elizabeth Woodville. But she's very different in her European education, her French education, but, so in Mechlin, and so she's more traveled than Henry VIII. She went to Provence. She saw things that no one at the English court had ever seen. And she's so different. And Elizabeth liked that, and I think understood that the French had been, in a way, and for so many years, friends with her mother. And it's so funny because my two books, Blood, Fire and Gold and Thorns, Lust and Glory, you have references of them, because in Blood, Fire and Gold, I discussed the fact that Catherine de Medici herself, when she was trying to, offer her sons to Elizabeth, kept telling Elizabeth, we should be friends because your mother was friends with princesses of France. She was, raised with Renée de France as a lady-in-waiting to Claude de France. And so, even though Catherine de Medici had never been at court at the same time as Anne Boleyn, everyone knew that Anne Boleyn had been in France and had been friends with very important royal members of the family. And so when she said, to Elizabeth, we should be friends, so it's in my Blood, Fire and Gold book, she's trying to explain to Elizabeth why the French side, an alliance with France, would be approved by her mother if she was still alive. So I think it's interesting. Obviously, Elizabeth chose not to marry. Why would you marry a Frenchman? Honestly, why, Jackson? No, you have no, But beyond the point, I think it's so interesting here to see the link between mother and daughter and the influence even after death, and and the legacy that you give. But also Paris was the port of Europe. I'm sorry to say that, but it's so true. It's unparalleled, and it doesn't matter how many orgies or not François Ier had there. It was still the definition of glory in many ways.
And I think you touch upon the idea there that that not only the Reformation wasn't clear cut, no one knew what was going on, but the same with Anne. There's a very much an idea of, well, where does she come from? How is she like this? Because I think a lot of us have this, and it's particularly pervasive in our earlier education of Henry VIII, and I hate to use the term 6 wives, but she's just seen as this English aristocratic daughter who ends up marrying Henry. So how does someone like Anne, who comes from a middling noble family, end up in France for 7 years, becoming this weird amalgamation of a French aristocratic lady and an English noblewoman?
Well, I think you're right. That's quite, that's the unusual part of the story of Anne Boleyn that is linked to, obviously, the great work of Lauren Mackay, who worked on, the biographies of Thomas Boleyn and George Boleyn. Because you have to look at Thomas Boleyn. It's Thomas Boleyn who, and that also, Jackson, for me, it's incredible the work he put into giving an education to his second daughter. That's why I don't believe that Anne Boleyn was a second daughter. No bloody way. And also, let's talk about this. But listen, I think it's also interesting. So in a way, to answer your question first, and then I'll go into my my theory. But I'll explain to you why. Thomas Boleyn was a protege of Wolsey. How did that happen? I think he was extremely smart. I think he knew he had kind of a nice background, nice education. He pulled off one of the greatest marriages of the first part of the 16th century. I mean, he married a Norfolk, Elizabeth, right? I mean, well done. I think well done. Because one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, noble family of England at the time. Right, let's say one of, because I don't want people to come at me. Let's say one of. So he managed that, and he has all these contacts, and obviously himself, he has a nice background. He's not just a nobody that we want to. He's just he keeps thinking about ambition and how growing his house. He really thinks about that, and he's gonna think, and I think that's where it's weird. He's gonna think, okay, he's gonna do everything he can in his power to send his daughter first at Margaret of Austria's court, the aunt of Charles V in Mechelen, so Spanish Netherlands, today Belgium. And I'm just like, that's so interesting. That why your second daughter, why do you work so much on your second daughter's education? But he sent her there. And then he's going to pull off all these strings when everything's going to go sour between, England and Spain. And then he's going to want her to be in France at the court of Claude of France. Well, first of Mary Tudor was going to be Queen of France for a few months. And then Claude, and then he managed to keep her there, which is insane again. Like, so you see how many times he does it, but it's all on him, right? It's all on his contacts, on how does he persuade these people. He does such a great job each time. And she benefited from that, completely benefited from this. I think an interesting parallel that no one talks about, absolutely no one talks about it, Jackson, and I think you're gonna like it. Thomas Boleyn really believed in the education of his daughter, Anne Boleyn. Who else really believed in the education of his daughters? Thomas More. Thomas More gave a great education to his daughters, all of them, not just his firstborn. But what's interesting, and you'll see with Dr. Joanne Paul and her work, where she explains, that they pleaded in front of Parliament or court, and they were so eloquent and so smart, so intelligent, so well raised, so well educated, they could speak for themselves. Anne Boleyn was the OG. She was like that. And all of this because Thomas Boleyn was the one who said, like, no, my daughter will be something else. And Jackson, what's incredible as well is that when you hear, Thomas Boleyn is such a bad father, manipulative, blah, 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 he's just using his daughter. Wait a minute. I'm always like putting a full stop at this. It was never on his cards to make her Queen of England, but he really wanted her to be different, to have more options, to be more educated, more learnt, to have more knowledge. It's great in many ways what he offered her. And maybe he didn't think that it would just be through tutors, but it would be through life experience, right? Being at court. And obviously you have then this idea, oh, that's interesting then. Like, she still becomes eyes and ears for him. And I think that's a very interesting relationship, because I don't think he uses her as we'd like to think that he used her. But at the same time, I think that they were close to each other, and she became a political partner, in her own right. And obviously then the story with Henry VIII, became later when she came back from France. But yes, I think it's just interesting to see, like, it's very unusual. And when I read about, we don't know who was born first, Mary or Anne. But I don't see any argument for Mary to be first. I really don't. Like, why? And so people say, oh, just because he favored Anne, he preferred Anne. But that sounds silly, doesn't it? You at a time where you don't have that preferences. You're just so happy that your kid is, not dying in infancy. So why would he do that? Why would he prefer so much Anne that he would not give a good education to Mary at all?
I think it ties into something that you said in a recent talk we did on with Alex Courtney about Mary Queen of Scots, where you said, we look back on Mary with the hindsight that she loses.
Yes.
And I think with Anne, we look back on this period of her life with the hindsight that she becomes queen. And
yes.
And as you're saying, like, Anne and Thomas never believed that she was going to become queen, and there's never this belief that Mary is going to become queen. And I think a lot of the time we do look back on this and say, well, she's going to win against Catherine, she's going to become queen, and we try and fit the rest of the puzzle around
exactly
that hindsight.
Exactly, and I think you're right. Like, there's something where we have to look at what happened between 1515 and 1521 as if we didn't know what happened in 1520 from 1527 onwards. and just look at, it's just a father trying to give the best chances to his daughter, trying to make her different. But he does it with obviously an ultimate goal, which is for her to land after that a very good marriage prospect. But also, I think again, to make again the parallel with Thomas More, I think these men also wanted their daughters. The Renaissance and the 16th century is such an interesting period because you have so many powerful women in charge. Margaret of Austria, Isabel of Castile. You have so many. You have Catherine of Aragon becoming the first European diplomat. You have so many. And then obviously as you move on, Marie de Guise, Mary the First, Mary Stuart, Elizabeth the First, boom, boom. It's unheard of, really, when you look at the 16th century. It's the rise of women power. It really is. And I think it's because there were some men like Thomas More, like Thomas Boleyn, who wanted to give the best chances to their daughters. And I think through the Renaissance and the revival of classical studies, there were also questions. We always think that the Renaissance and revival of classical studies is just to open these Greek and Roman books and be like, oh my God, it was great, how it was done 1,000 years ago. But I think it's not that. I think it's like, what can we learn? What did they do that was so interesting, but how can we improve on it? And how can we change things? And I think there were some men, even if in this misogynistic patriarchal society, that were thinking to equip their daughters that they loved, they needed them to be different, and to be different you needed to have that type of education. So Thomas More is going to rely on tutors and everything. For Thomas Boleyn, he thought that Anne Boleyn needed something different, or simply because maybe he didn't have the resources to find the tutors he wanted, or maybe there might be different reasons, or because he wanted to move in the political spheres more quickly, because maybe he was highly ambitious and he thought like, okay, now I'm married into the Norfolk family, where can she marry next, right? And I think that's interesting. I think that is interesting to see her story through that lens, and always trying to be like, okay, when we're in 1515, we are in 1515, we're not in 1536, or we're not in 1533 when she's crowned Queen of England. And I think also we need to remember, and I said it so many times, I'm sure people are tired of me for saying it, but Anne Boleyn did not pursue Henry VIII. She did not want him. He wanted her. He's the one who betrayed Catherine of Aragon. He's the one who hurt them both, and repeatedly. And one of them he's going to kill. So that's the end of story, right? Like, it's like, that's it. I will die on that hill.
And I think that's one of my pet hates of this. The whole narrative that we have about Six Wives is that like, oh, it's, we'll pit Catherine against Anne and Anne against Jane and so on. Like, no, it is Henry's fault, and if Henry comes to you, you can't say no.
You can't say no.
You can't say no. But then you've touched on Henry pursuing, and I think it's abundantly clear through 5 of Henry's wives that he has a type, and it is the very intelligent, well-spoken, eloquent women who were manoeuvring around his court. So why and how does Henry start to pursue Anne when there's question mark over if he had already pursued and had relations with her sister Mary?
That's a very, Jackson, that's another big problem I have. Because I'm one of these historians who remain highly doubtful. I'm not again, so I'm going to say it. Don't come at me with hatred, guys. I know, and also don't come at me with telling me what other historians have said and written. I know. Okay, I'm just saying that when you look at and I think it's good. I'm going to answer your question, but I think it's interesting to see that the story is when Henry VIII wanted Elizabeth Blount, He got her. When he wanted Mary Boleyn, he got her. And that's where I put a question mark. And then when he wanted Anne Boleyn, that was different, because Anne Boleyn is going to say, oh, because how you treated Mary, now I want to be queen, And first of all, we have no evidence of that, of her saying that. We have no evidence of her referencing to her sister being the mistress of the king. The evidence we have of Henry VIII choosing Mary Boleyn first, there's two that are compelling, or that real sources. One is contemporary, and one is later on in the 1570s. That's where there's a problem. The first one, it's Henry himself. When did he say it? When he tried to get rid of Anne. What did he say when he tried to get rid of Catherine of Aragon? That she had slept actually with Arthur. So that was the reason why she had not given him a son, and that's the reason why the marriage should be dissolved and annulled, or whatever, what he was asking the Pope to do. And with Anne, he was like, I slept with your sister, and that is why this marriage, is like incest. He was trying to make it up a massive shit, and she was like, what on earth? But it never comes before. There's no discussion of it before. That's interesting, isn't it? And the second source is that historians love throwing at me is Nicholas Sanders. Nicholas Sanders was a Catholic who hated Elizabeth, and he was a child when, everything happened. To be fair, I'm not even sure he was born. Anyway, so if he was born, he was very young. But in 1570, he wrote 1572, 74. Honestly, with the 70s, I have lots of French dates, so bear with me. It's someone there where he's writing a pamphlet saying that Elizabeth, that basically the daughter of a whore, and every woman in her family is basically a whore. So yeah, so unless we find a source that doesn't hate Elizabeth, that doesn't try to have a dig at her legitimacy, or if we find a source that is, from someone not Eustace Chapuis. To be fair, I've never read anything in Eustace Chapuis' letters, but there's some letters that are still untouched. No, but even him, would you really, get? He's such a gossip. The things he wrote was after Henry said himself, so it's not.
Yeah, and I take what Chapuis says about Anne with a grain of salt, to be honest, because he is so vehemently in favour of Catherine that it's just not.
Absolutely. But also, Jackson, I've been thinking about that. It's there's some stuff that I think we can trust him about. There's some comments he makes that are all I'm saying is that his perception is not to be completely dismissed. But there's still not these things with Mary is to me a massive mystery. Again, I'm not saying that it never happened. It could have happened that Mary was for a short time the mistress of Henry VIII. However, there are some problems with that, because Henry VIII, unlike François Ier, is not a womanizer. He's just a woman killer. So I don't. No, I do know which one is worse. I don't need to say which one is worse. I'd rather meet a womanizer than a serial killer who loves killing women. But he's true that he doesn't have. He cheats on everyone as well. The way he treats Anne, and when at the end, obviously there's something going on with Jane Seymour. And I'm not shaming Jane Seymour, because you said it. You said it so well. You can't refuse the bloody king. What do you think? And after that, when he cut off her head, Anne's head, obviously Jane is like, do you really think that a sane woman, would want to marry a murderer? No. But does she have a choice? No. And she knows that her head is next on the line if she doesn't give him, what he wants. And I feel so bad for Jane on that level, right? So I think Henry VIII had an interest in Anne, but the difference... So before it was Elizabeth Blunt, and it could have been Elizabeth Blunt. To be fair, all of it could have been, because she gave him a son. Brilliant. Well done, women. But with Anne, I think there's a few things. I think it was different. because of the political and diplomatic situation and the fact that there were the rise of reformed ideas, the rise of, when I say reformed ideas, the rise of contesting the way things were done in Rome. So thinking, okay, because Henry had never really considered leaving Catherine before that. Even when he was with Elizabeth Blunt, he was like, Elizabeth Blunt was not even a mistress that he kept for a long time. He was with her, got tired of her, had a son with her, rewarded her with money and wealth. Thank you, Henry. Well done for that. He didn't kill her. But then as time passed by, where is my son, Catherine? Where is my son, Catherine? And I did it. Look, I did it once, so obviously the problem is not me. The problem is you. And then there were whispers, but, maybe you should be able... And if the dissolution of his marriage had happened, if the annulment of his marriage had happened, nothing... He would not have broken with Rome. There's no point. Because he would have gotten what he wanted. But he couldn't. And so Anne happened at a moment where... And I think the fact as well, if I'm honest with you, the fact that she was not easy to say yes, the fact that she refused to be a mistress. Maybe she refused to be a mistress because she spent too much time at François I's court and she didn't want to be a mistress. But also I think with Anne, I think it's because he ruined... Well, he's partly one of the reasons why her match to Henry, Earl of Northumberland, was ruined. So I think if she probably thought, if you're going to ruin my prospects, it has to be for something else than sleeping with you, right? And that's bold, because then she did play a bit. Like, when I say play, it's not play. She did keep her distance. We have these letters. It's crazy how much she is into her. We don't have her responses, but for someone to insist like that, it's clearly that her responses would not have been that interesting. When I mean that interesting, they would have been interesting, but they would have probably not given him what he wanted. Otherwise, he would not have kept asking the same thing over and over again and saying how crushed he was that, she didn't want to be a mistress, blah, blah, blah. And then more and more whispers, more and more people around him, Thomas Cranmer, Thomas Cromwell. Hey, you can be the one in charge. You can decide. And then if you break with Rome, then you are the one in charge and you can marry whoever you want. And that's so dangerous with a cycle like Henry. You end up with having 6 wives, for crying out loud.
And I think he does. And I think with Anne because she can't say no. There's an element of making the best of a situation, and I really think she does, because she ends up being queen, albeit for not very long. But she does
longer than Jane.
Yeah, that's saying something, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Not a competition. But longer than Jane, longer than Anne of Cleves, longer than Catherine Howard. But then I think she's second. She's after Catherine Parr, and obviously the longest is Catherine of Aragon.
But in the end, she still is unable to play Henry for the rest of her life, to be honest. And I think there's that idea there that, I'm certainly a subscriber to it, that Henry was a hopeless romantic. And as soon as that's kind of, I'm not disagreeing, he's a woman killer, 100% woman killer. But that hopeless romantic need that he wants to keep fulfilling, because he's gone from a very, I think, very loving marriage with Catherine for at least 20 years of it, to, several lust-filled marriages.
Yeah. But what I like with this idea of this hopeless romantic is, I think he's not on that he's very different. So I'm always comparing him to his contemporary François Ier. He's very different from François. I don't think he's chasing sexual attention. He likes being. So I would agree with it. When a hopeless romantic, I think he likes the idea of being in love, of falling in love. So he likes the first And that's why it's quite incredible that it lasted so long with Catherine of Aragon. And I think it's mostly because Catherine, like the other wives, I think they have this in common, all of them. Catherine Howard maybe more difficult. I think Catherine Howard, he tried to go for something else. And that's where also it failed, right? Like so quickly. But in Anne of Cleves is obviously, again, he tried to go for dynastic or, political, like complete political diplomatic alliance. While Catherine of Aragon brought this while also being this figure of this, she's a bit older, not a lot older, she's a bit older, is, beautiful, but also she's so intelligent. And I think intellectually, I think what is it called? The people, what is the term when you're sapiosexual? Is that the term?
Sapiosexual. Yeah, I think you got it right. Yeah.
When you love knowledge or something, like there's something about you basically, to fall in love, you basically need to be intellectually stimulated, right? Like something like that. And I think Catherine of Aragon is the only one who did that for a long period of time. Because herself, or her role education, she's the only one of his wives to have such a strong and diverse education. Anne of Cleves doesn't even come close to what Catherine received, and even her years in France is what's going to get her closest to what Catherine had. But Catherine is someone who really, the arts, the music, also the books, and she was just such an intellectual that I think he kept falling in love with her over the, and also, and I don't think he was a womanizer. I don't think he was attracted to just beauty and needed to spread his seeds everywhere. And
yeah, he's not like Edward IV, which is anything with a pulse. It's like it's something completely different. I mean, when you look at the portraits, none of them look the same.
Yeah, but they all have this in common, where they are all intellectually compatible with, like, in a way compatible with him, right? Again, I think Anne of Cleves was extremely intelligent, so I think she, in a way, the circumstances around their marriage made it a failure. I think he went for completely something else, and I think he tried. There's a glitch as well in his relationship with Catherine, which is Elizabeth Blount, where Elizabeth Blount, obviously here it's, I think, a sexual passion. That's why it doesn't last. She has nothing else to tell him. He has nothing else to keep. But Anne is different, because Anne, it's sexual. I believe there's a physical and sexual attraction with, she's more traveled than me, more traveled than Catherine. Oh, she has something to say. Oh, she's intelligent. Oh my gosh, she reads. And obviously you have to be very careful with Henry VIII when you read as a woman, because but I think he liked to be intellectually challenged and stimulated. And I think that's why, in many ways, for me, the three, Jean Seymour as well, but the three that really kind of grabbed him is obviously Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, and Catherine Parr later on in his life, because with Catherine Parr, it's a very much intellectual kind of companionship as well. But he likes intelligent women, but he doesn't like when he realized that they're more intelligent than him. And they all were more intelligent than him. And that's why I think it always got triggered. When Anne voiced her concerns about the dissolution of monasteries, Jane Seymour did the same. It pissed him off, each time. So I think that's very interesting when we look at it this way. And when we look at, like, the type of man that he was, and I think a hopeless romantic is right. And in a way, it goes along with the fact that he was also a psychopath in my mind, a monster, because he was always chasing, like, this kind of, I'm feeling again something interesting, and when it fails, it's almost rage that is left. Like, why didn't it work out? What failed? And he has this type of violence in him. Also, what struck me with Henry VIII is the fact, like, he's really not merciful. is so. I hope it really all the deaths that he caused haunted him when he died.
I mean, when you look at Merciful, out of all 6, Anne of Cleves, Anna of Cleves, it's merciful, but it's not the best. Like, no one else would consider that mercy, being allowed to live but not being allowed to go home. Catherine, it's almost hell on earth. It's almost worse than death.
Yeah.
So I think that need for constant stimulation does affect him, and you see it with his counsellors as well. But then when Anne trips over and she voices concerns, how is she unable to save herself? Because it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse for her.
Well, in 1536, the problem with Anne is that Anne didn't realise, like that as long as Catherine of Aragon lived, she was safe. Once Catherine is gone, she has no, if she doesn't have a son, there's no safety net for Anne. And that is because of one thing. The Catholic community of Europe didn't recognize the marriage of Henry VIII to Anne Boleyn. They only recognized the marriage of Henry VIII to Catherine of Aragon. Once she died, he's a bachelor. He's no longer married. And so for him, it means that he can get rid of Anne, whatever that means, and marry again. And the problem is that Anne has another miscarriage, and she has enemies growing. Thomas Cromwell is one of them. And she threatened him in March 1536. Indirectly, she used a chaplain to do it, but it's basically a real threat. And for Cromwell, he's not stupid. He knows that, in a way, she's the one, she helped. How could I say that? She influenced in many ways the way Henry VIII is going to treat Wolsey. So for Cromwell, he blamed the death and what happened to Wolsey, his fall, on Anne and the Boleyn faction, rather than Henry. And I think, again, you always need to go to the source, which is Henry, because you can't really influence Henry to do something he doesn't want to do. And I think Anne was stupid if she thought that it was thanks to her influence. She was a bit dumb on that one, because, again, you cannot influence Henry to do something he doesn't want to do, regardless of how powerful you think or what type of power or influence you have over him. And Thomas Cromwell makes the same mistakes after her. And so for Cromwell, it's like, okay, she's onto me. And he fears her. And you've also noticed, because that's a thing that people don't talk about, is the relationship between Henry VIII and Anne is very complex. Because it is about sexual and physical attraction, but it is also about intellectual stimulation. They have massive, it's a toxic passion. They might have massive ups and downs in their relationship. So at some point you might think, you look in 1534, they might have a massive argument. And also they were so fired that they would have arguments in front of everyone. But then 2 months later, they would go on a progress together. They would look lovey-dovey again, and she would be pregnant again. So Thomas Cromwell was thinking, okay, she just got a miscarriage. That's my window, right? That's my window. Catherine is gone. She got a miscarriage. I know they're on bad terms. He's pissed off with her. Everyone is pushing Jane Seymour into his arms. So he's thinking, before he gets tired of Jane Seymour, which I think he would have, because she was a bit bland compared to Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. Bland, but not as bland as we think she is. Anyway, so he thought there's a window here, and he was testing the waters with Henry, and Henry had enough of Anne. Also, he didn't like the fact that, and her, I feel like she felt, I had a miscarriage, but my biggest rival is dead, so all good, right? Now people are going to recognize me as the legitimate Queen of England. No. And what's so weird, Jackson, is that what we don't have, and even Shapley, the biggest gossip who has all his ears and eyes everywhere, cannot tell you how this, How do you... He's saying, oh, I'm hearing whispers and I see the Privy Council like meeting. I have no idea what it is about. He thinks it has nothing to do with Anne. In his mind, everyone knows that Anne and Henry are supposed to go to Rochester together, and so in his, no one is thinking, and even Anne, she's just waiting. She's like, yeah, you'll come and get me. I'll be ready, and we'll go. And she's probably looking forward to rekindle what she needs to rekindle. It's a few months after her miscarriage, so she's probably trying to think of trying again for a baby. And then on the 2nd of May, she's arrested. And the charges are insane. And that's Thomas Cromwell trying his best to get rid of her. And I don't know if you watch the TV show The Tudors, there's one thing that really annoys me in that show, is that basically at the end of the series, he's visited by his wives, the wives that gave him children, so Catherine and Jane. They're all blaming him for lots of things. Anyway, but because as you should, because he was a shittier husband. But Anne, basically the conversation goes where Anne is saying, I've never, he said, I can't look at you because of what you did to me. And she said, I've never done anything to you. And she said, I thought you knew that I was innocent. And he's like, no, I didn't. As if, that was 12 minutes, as if it was all Cromwell's fault. As if Cromwell came up with this and managed to convince Henry VIII that all of this was true. What I think happened was they met, Cromwell and Henry. We need to get rid of her. She won't take a nunnery. No. Well, she needs to die for treason then. And then they try to think of, a solution. And maybe she said, I think it's possible that she said the thing with the shoes, like you're looking for dead men's shoes, to Henry Norris, who was being silly at court. And they were like, gotcha. Because just imagining the death of the king is treason. And then they were like, but that's not enough. That's not enough because people will not hate her. So wait. So we're going to say she had sex with him. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. And then they started thinking, okay, let's do 2 weeks after giving birth to Elizabeth, because they were not thinking. They were just putting dates and places where it was impossible for her to have done it. And they were just putting that, and they were like, that's not enough. People will still feel bad for her. So let's add more people. Yeah, there's this musician that she really likes and she gave him money. Yes, him. That's good, because Anne Boleyn was extremely generous. A bit too generous. She had many deaths when she died because of this generosity. And then they were like, add this man because they didn't like him. And add this man because we didn't like him either. And having a lot of men meant she was a whore. And this evil woman who just loved sex all the time. She couldn't stop herself. But that's not enough. We need something. Oh, I know. And you know what? We will punish the Boleyns. Let's go for George. Incest. It will be the most disgusting things. And it will be the end of the Boleyn line. And I will teach the fucking Boleyns on how not to fucking piss with me and give me this. I really can see a scene where Henry VIII was like, yes, let's do that. Let's fucking crush Thomas and Elizabeth Boleyn for, allowing me to marry that fucking stupid daughter. And that would be the end of it. No, but I know you're laughing, but I'm telling you, I'm sure. And I think it's pure hatred and cruelty and all of, I can see Henry VIII being that disgusting human being and thinking like that, and now we got her. And then he told Cromwell, then you do all of it, you put all the accusations together, and I want to get rid of her very quickly, because let's not forget about something else. She's arrested on the 2nd, trial is the 15th, dead on the 19th. There's no way with that time, 3 weeks, that the French could have done anything for her. It's how long it takes to go back and forth, with the letters saying, Anne Boleyn has been arrested. By the time you come back, or you try to do François Ier, even if he would have tried, it was too late. And they concealed it as well, as much as they could. They did not want it to be this big thing. And then, when we have the witness, Lancelot de Carle, was the secretary of the French ambassador who witnessed the execution of Anne Boleyn, and he wrote The Life and Death of Anne Boleyn, which later Edward Hall will use some of his passages to say, what she said. He will change the words, he will change the speeches, but it's more or less, what she, like, we can see that he used the source that he had, Lancelot de Cars. Lancelot de Cars, when history comes back and is printed in France, Henry VIII is going to ask for it to be censored. It's not going to work. People knew what Henry VIII did. And that is why, after that, like, no French princess, no French noblewoman want anything to do with this man. Marie de Guise, who's Henry VIII is like, oh, let's get married, after Jane Seymour died. And she's like, no, my neck is too small. No fucking way I'm going near you, you psycho. Like, it's whatever, how much you hated Anne Boleyn, he killed his wife. It's unheard of. Whether or not you recognize that she was Queen of England, because as I said, lots of Catholic people did not recognize the marriage, but they were like, he still executed her, and no one really believed the accusations either. Like, I mean, he tried to make her the biggest whore that had ever lived. How many men she slept with? 5, 6, one of her brothers. Like, he tried to ruin everything. He tried to ruin the reputation of the mother of his daughter. I mean, I don't know how anyone can say anything nice about Henry VIII. I literally don't know. Sorry, Jackson.
Well, it's very similar to one of the Henrys. I can't remember off the top of my head, but one of the Henrys earlier, when he didn't he didn't get on with his wife. I think it's Eleanor of Provence. When he didn't get on with Eleanor of Provence, he didn't execute her. She still lived. So it's completely unprecedented what Henry's doing here, and I really like how you bring in the French and just go, no, I don't want anything to do with him, because it's a completely valid response.
Not just that, Jackson. You know what's so interesting is that what people don't know as well is that, and I don't think I wrote it in my books now. I don't think it was in my PhD because I was going through stuff. But even in 15, so way later, 15. I want to say something. 1580. Henry III is struggling to conceive with his wife, who is de Lorraine Vaudémont. And so everyone is saying you should divorce her. You should get rid of her. And he said publicly, I'm not Henry VIII. I love my wife. I will stand by her side, and we will keep trying to have children. So not only it's an answer to what he did to Anne Boleyn, it's an answer to what he did to Catherine of Aragon. He had already for everyone, the surname the worst husband ever. Do you want to be a good husband? Don't be a Henry VIII. That was probably the joke. No, but that's crazy that, decades later, that's what he chose to say at a French court when defending his wife. I found it quite beautiful.
I think it's incredibly powerful as well. So off the back of that, then, how is it that it's Anne who is the one of the 6 who has the central place in our thinking?
Because her story is unfair. And I know it. I got so much backlash on my Instagram once because I said, like, one of the greatest injustices, right? And people came at me, what about, slavery? What about the kids that are dying in it? Blah, 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 blah. Of course, guys. I said one of. But I think here, we always go back to Anne, and she has this central place because we all know her innocence. We all know that the massive injustice. So that's the first reason. That's this massive injustice. The second one is that he tried to erase her. We have so little from her because he ordered Cromwell and his men to go to Hever Castle and destroy everything. Do you realize that, Jackson? Do you realize that these parents, he stopped their line with George? He killed 2 out of 3 of their children. And then they arrive with men. And they're like, we're going to destroy everything that Anne Boleyn has ever had, ever touched, ever written. And we're so lucky that we still have a book of prayers. that was saved by the women, the brilliant research that Kate McCaffrey is doing, brilliant women around her who saved her book of prayers, because the world would have nothing of Anne. So I think that's why there's injustice, the fact that he tried to erase her, so there's this kind of like, oh my God, who was she? We can't get enough of Anne. I think that's why we're like so interested in finding more and more, and maybe we're missing some letters here. Maybe we need to keep looking. And the third reason, Jackson, is because she's the mother of one of the greatest English monarchs that has ever ruled. She has her flaws, many, many flaws. But Elizabeth I has ruled England 44 years on her own, and she was an incredible, incredible monarch. And the mother of that incredible, incredible monarch is Anne Boleyn, the biggest whore of English history, which she wasn't. So one, injustice. Second, the fact that we try to erase her. And I'm so glad that he fell, because 500 year plus letters, we're still talking about her, and we'll keep talking about her. And she's the mother of one of the greatest English monarchs that has ever ruled. That's the reason we always go back to her, because she has a legacy. Elizabeth is her legacy. Even though Elizabeth stopped the line of the Tudors, she's the legacy of Anne Boleyn.
And I think that the fact that Henry couldn't control her legacy is such a hugely powerful and poignant moment in her history. But now I've got a final fun question for you, Estelle, as we do for every guest. You are, and I'm sorry if I'm going to out you now, but we are very good friends. You are a big Kylie fan. So what is your favourite Kylie song?
Oh my God. Oh gosh, there are so many. But there was this, oh my God, what was it? I had a favorite album, and it's one of her recent ones. What was it? 13 or something? When was it out? It was such a new album, such new music. She was so, I remember walking the streets of London with it in my ears, and I just loved it so much. But it was pop music. So it would be that album. I think it's I won't say 2013 or 2012, 2013, something like that. If you're looking for it.
Yeah, I am looking for it right now.
Is it that one? Now you make me want to look for it.
Kiss Me Once?
Yes.
So it's just one album, Kiss Me Once by
I
Kylie
love it.
Minogue.
Honestly, I've listened to it. Oh gosh, now I'm going to want to listen to it again.
And then where can people go to interact with you online, but then buy your books? Because it's not just Thorns, Lust and Glory that you have.
So I guess, any retailers, Waterstones, Blackwell's, wherever, like Amazon, obviously. And you can interact. I'm mostly on Instagram. You'll find me on Instagram. It's my favorite social media platform. I don't do TikTok, and I've left the dark side of the internet. You will know what I refer to if you've ever been on that platform. You know that you had to leave it too. Thank you so much, Jackson. You're funny.
That's all right. I'll make sure they're all in the description below. But thank you, Estelle. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The History with Jackson podcast. Hello and welcome to the History with Jackson podcast, the podcast where we bring up-to-date historical research to you in an accessible and digestible way.